Let's turn to the Middle East now. The United Nations says the amount of humanitarian aid entering Gaza has decreased by 2/3 since Israel began its military operation in Rafah earlier this month. The Israeli military says it has established full operational control over the Philadelphi Corridor along the Gaza-Egypt border, discovering dozens of rocket launchers and at least 20 cross-border smuggling tunnels there so far. A national security advisor to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he expects the war against Hamas to continue for at least another 7 months. Let's go to Jerusalem now and speak to our Middle East correspondent, Yolan Nell. Let's just talk, first of all, if we can, about this Philadelphi Corridor. Can you tell us a bit more about what it is and what Israel says it's found?
Yes, this is the 14-kilometre strategically important strip of land that lies on the Gaza-Egypt border. Now, the Israelis saying that they have effective control of that corridor now, and talking about what they have found there, saying there have been multiple rocket launches and rocket launch sites they've found, pointing out that they say in recent weeks something like 70 rockets and mortars have been fired by Hamas from the Rafah area, suggesting really that it was locating some of these launch sites very close to the border with Egypt to try to avoid Israel going after them and perhaps making a mistake and firing into Egypt. They've also found, they say, some 20 tunnels which they believe were used to smuggle weapons into Palestinian armed groups like Hamas. And they say there may be more of these tunnels. They're locating them and destroying them along this border area. Now, all of this is likely to ratchet up tensions further between Israel and Egypt. Egypt's concern will be that Israeli forces will try to maintain a presence along this border in the longer term. And also they've been saying that, Egyptian security sources talking to the Egyptian media, that the tunnels are being used, they say, as an excuse by Israel to justify its Rafah offensive. And they say that they have dealt themselves effectively with smuggling tunnels, particularly over the past decade.
OK, thank you so much, Yolan Nell, for us there live in Jerusalem. We can speak now to British Army veteran and Chief Executive of the intelligence company Sibylline, Justin Crump. Hello to you, Justin. We're just hearing from Yolan there a little bit about what the Israeli army says that it's discovered. How significant is this, that it now controls that area of the border?
I mean, it's a really important piece of ground for Israel. If you think of any military force that's attacking an adversary, I mean, one of the things you want to do is surround that adversary. You want to cut that adversary off from supply. And Hamas almost certainly wasn't getting supplies through Israel. So Israeli suspicion has always been on the border with Egypt. Certainly military planning would assume that there was some permeability of that border, whether it was the Rafah crossing, whether it was tunnels. Obviously, Egypt would argue with that. But from the Israeli point of view, controlling that border cuts Hamas off from further supply, or does a lot to stop it from doing that. It also stops this safe haven, as you've heard there, this use of that border area as an area that Israel can't really strike because it's too close to Egypt. It's an area that Hamas have used to stockpile weapons, to launch weapons from. And we've seen examples of that. And of course, the Israelis have found launch positions of rockets that were exploiting the position. So very important, what we call sort of vital ground or key terrain for Israel in this war.
Right. And in terms of the relations, as Yolande was mentioning, between Egypt and Israel, presumably tensions will be heightened now because of what's going on there.
Yeah, because the agreement over Rafah goes back to 1979. And of course, when Israel was in the Gaza Strip, there was an agreement that Egyptian forces, Israeli forces would be matched by mutual agreement. I mean, the two nations have fought several devastating conflicts in that area. And obviously, neither side wanted to see the other build up troops. Now, obviously, that fell into abeyance when Hamas were in Gaza, when there was a blockade of Gaza by both Egypt and Israel and control of that. But we're now back to the point that the Israelis are opposite the Egyptians on the border fence, and actually one Egyptian soldier killed in the last couple of days, and what appears to have been an exchange of fire with the Israelis moving along the corridor. So it certainly is more tension. Egypt arguing strongly that they have controlled the tunnels, and saying, as we've heard there, it's an excuse. Israel pointing at the tunnels, but to be fair, it's not clear that all of them cross the border, but they're certainly present along that area. It was certainly a big Hamas operational area. So I think Israel feeling vindicated, but perhaps not as much as they'd like. Egypt feeling defensive, but maybe with something to actually take on board here. So a lot of surface tension. How much it's going to really affect relations I think remains to be seen at the moment.
Okay, and what about this national security advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu saying that they expect the war against Hamas to go on for at least another 7 months?
I mean, if you think of the sort of conflict this is, and you think back to, say, the war on terror or something like that, the military phase can sometimes be the easiest part of it, and then you've got to build afterwards. And this ties in, I think, with the US commentary that they want to see a plan for the day after the fighting stops, because the fighting won't really stop. I mean, I don't think Israel can achieve a purely military victory against Hamas that settles this, and then there will be peace and rebuilding and prosperity. This is going to be a long-running sore for Israel, I think, in terms of how they deal with the future security and rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. And it's a real question as to how Israel avoids it going on not just another 7 months, but another 7 years, I think, at various levels of intensity. And certainly they haven't achieved their even stated military aims yet, let alone their political ones.
Okay, well, thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate your time. That's Justin Crump.
Thanks.
Around